Beyond the Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
About 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day, Katie Greifeld and Scarlet Fu, we are counting you down to the closing bell, and here to help take us beyond the bell, we have a global simulcast, joined now by Carol Massar and Jess Menton, in, of course, for Tim Stenovic. And we bring together our Bloomberg Television, radio, and YouTube audiences to parse through this trading day, Carol. And it's an up day, but as we've been talking about, a third straight month of declines.
Yeah, right. The longer trend line is really significant. And here we are less than 24 hours away from that next Fed decision. So it does feel like this is kind of a day we're just kind of waiting to see what we get in terms of color commentary from the Fed. Having said that, home builders are up almost 2% in today's session. This is U.S. home prices set a new record with a seventh month, I should say, streak of gains in terms of prices, Jess. So that certainly is an outperformer in today's session.
Yeah, and this would be the longest losing streak for the S&P 500 since the onset of the pandemic in 2020. But I would want to point out the S&P 500, I mean, it's trading around 41.95 right now. Actually, its one-year average is around 41.74, and that was a key level that technicians were watching to see if the S&P 500 could end up recapturing above that. So that is an optimistic sign going into November.
And of course, we're still in earnings season. It does feel like the bulk of it has passed us by, and it probably will be that way after Apple reports on Thursday. But before we get there, we do have AMD, which of course is seen as like the next chip maker that can really jump on this AI bandwagon following NVIDIA at this point.
And AMD, I mean, you think about the year-to-date gains that they're sitting on, it's pretty significant, but we'll see what actually happens after the bell when they report earnings. As we count down, you know, we have, 7 seconds left. It's going to be an up day. The S&P 500 finishing about 0.6% higher. The NASDAQ about 0.5% higher. The Dow also getting in on the action, up about 0.4%. So small moves, Carol, you know, in the grand scheme of things, but still a positive day.
Yeah, the bulls will take it, right? Whatever they can get right now. Having said that, the S&P 500, you've got most names, Scarlet, in the index higher today, 412 to be exact, 89 to the downside. You look at the NASDAQ 100, 80 names are moving higher in today's session, 21 losing a little bit of ground here.
Yeah, we're seeing some market breadth, right? You look at the breakdown in the S&P 500's 24 industry groups, and even though you only have a gain of about 2/3%, all 24 groups are in the green. Media entertainment, basically little changed. Real estate investment trust at the other end, up by almost 2%.
All right, so let's get to some individual gainers as we wait for some of those earnings to cross the Bloomberg. GE Healthcare Technologies, remember they were spun out from parent GE earlier this year. This stock really soaring in today's session, up about 5.4% off its highs of the day, but nonetheless an outperformer. Number one gainer in the NASDAQ 100, an earnings beat, and it boosted the lower end of its profit guidance for the full year. It's up about 12% so far this year. Arista Networks, it's a networking communications company. It was also among the outperformers, hitting an all-time high, up 14% in today's session. Reported after the close last night, fourth quarter adjusted EPS and revenue beat estimates. Morgan Stanley then coming out, upgrading the stock to overweight, and they also raised their price target to $220 a share from $185, and the stock you can see closing at about 200 and change today. One more, Dexcom. I talk about it a lot because it keeps popping up among the most performers and best performers in the NASDAQ 100, often also, I believe, in the S&P as well. But number two gainer in the NASDAQ 100, they make glucose monitoring systems. They've been killed and were smacked down essentially from about mid-July to mid-October. They dropped about 45%. It's rallied about 16% since that time. This basically is analysts saying maybe it's overdone. There are concerns about those new class of weight class drugs, concerns that it would cut into their business. But nonetheless, it continues, you guys, to see their bounce back.
Looking over at the decliners today, have to start off with JetBlue dropping more than 10%. So this is its worst day since June 13th of 2022. Of course, that company did miss Wall Street expectations when you are looking at those earnings estimates, and it did forecast a worse than expected loss this quarter, so it is facing different constraints when it does come to its operations, and from air traffic control limits, apparently too many seats for sale across the industry. So we're going to see how that impacts obviously holiday travel coming up here soon. Another one I want to point out, Caterpillar, especially a barometer when you are thinking about what this means for the global economy. That stock down almost 7%, so this was its worst day since April of last last year. So the machinery maker did report a sequential decline in its order backlog. So that does cause concern for what that could mean in the months ahead and if things are beginning to slow there. And then, of course, Catalent. This is among the biggest, actually decliners, the second biggest decliner in the S&P 500 today, down almost 14%. So its worst day since May 8th of this year. So really it had to do with the deal with another pharmaceutical company. But looking at this basically being a third-party filler here, it did tumble, and it was in an agreement with another company for supply agreements in January for manufacturing. When it comes to as actually looking at muscular dystrophy here between the ages of 4 and 7, but it did not meet its primary endpoint with the company it was working at. So you are seeing that stock getting pummeled today.
All right, let's take a quick look at the bond market. Of course, the big action is tomorrow, 8:30 a.m. We have that Treasury refunding announcement, and then 2 p.m. we get that Fed decision. If you take a look at the yield moves today, they look small. That actually masks a lot of intraday drama, particularly on the 10-year yield. It's only about 2 basis points higher right now, but at one point today, we were as low as 480, so a 10 basis point intraday swing. You take a look at the 2-year yield, only up about 1 basis point. Small moves across the curve as well. But guys, we know that the big events for this market come tomorrow. It really feels like a holding pattern, especially when you think about the fact that we haven't really had any Fed speak to speak of in this quiet period.
Yeah, right. It really does feel kind of in a weird momentum or lack thereof, if you will, as we wait for some more information from Jay Powell and company. Real quick check on First Solar. Should we do that?
Yeah,
let's do it. All right, First Solar coming out with their third quarter results. Net sales, $801 million. That's a big miss. $877.2 million was the forecast. Third quarter EPS, $2.50 a share. That's a big beat. The estimate was for $2.03 a share. As for the outlook, the company still sees fiscal year gross margin of $1.2 billion to 1.3. Still sees fiscal year net sales of $3.4 to 3.6 billion. The estimate out there is $3.49 billion. And operating income for the fiscal year, they're talking about $770 million to $870 million. That's a little bit of a bump up. They had seen $745 million to $870 million. There were some worries. Solar Edge had done some warnings, so there was a little worry about that. But Solar, investors not liking it. Down about 2.4% here.
All right, let's also take a look at Caesars Entertainment, which reported earnings as well. EPS of 34 cents, beating the consensus estimate by a nickel. Same store adjusted EBITDA, $1.04 billion. Analysts were looking for $1.01 billion. And when it comes to net revenue, $2.99 billion, slightly higher than what analysts were anticipating, which was $2.93 billion. Caesars, of course, is much more domestically focused. It doesn't have that exposure to Macau like the other big casinos like Wynn or Las Vegas Sands, despite that company's name. So you're really looking at the spending patterns of visitors to the U.S. and Americans when it comes to Caesars.
And we know everybody's going to Europe, or have been, so they don't benefit.
Maybe not anymore.
Not anymore, right?
But also looking ahead to Advanced Micro Devices, waiting on those earnings reports, and especially with investors' focus being on that new AI accelerator chip. So it has been seen as the firm's basically its best hope for competing with, of course, NVIDIA's different chip maker, and especially when you're looking at the H100 there and what that could potentially mean for being competitive in that sort of space.
Yeah, this is an interesting moment for AMD. And of course, we also have Qualcomm reporting tomorrow. We get AMD in a couple of minutes, but that's really the tale of two chip giants there, because AMD, it's up something like 50% year to date. Can't say the same for Qualcomm. Pretty close to a little changed on the year. But you think about this real sort of arms race between these chip makers. Obviously, AMD has managed to maybe have a shot at taking some share, but this has really been such a story about NVIDIA this year.
Right. People fingers crossed, right, that in terms of the PC industry, that maybe we start to see some follow through there. But it really is about AI chips, Scarlett. We continue to, even though we've kind of backed off, I feel like a little bit, this earnings cycle in terms of going through the press releases and looking for everybody to mention AI. We know that this is a big part of everyone's business going forward, and they're all going to need chips to kind of get to that point.
Yeah, although for AMD, the AI story is really more about 2024 in terms of concrete numbers. But I think about what the exciting theme is for this quarter, this earnings season. It's all about, Ozempic. It's kind of replaced AI. What did you say it was, Katie?
It was the AI moment for healthcare.
There you go.
Is these weight loss drugs.
The things we talk about in between the show, right?
Chit-chatting, yeah.
During the breaks.
It's fascinating, but you're absolutely right. It feels like everybody does. I'm looking at AMD, still waiting for their earnings to come out. But of course, as soon as they cross, I know you guys will be all over it, as we will as well. All right. I believe that's a wrap. This cross-platform coverage, radio, TV, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals. A little bit of earnings, but you can tell from us, we're all kind of waiting for Jay Powell and company and that decision tomorrow.
Happy Halloween, by the way.
Happy Halloween. All right, we'll see you again tomorrow.